for smaller ones. Without it, most firms cannot make improvements, expand, or hire qualified workers that they need to succeed. In 1958, Congress recognized a gap in the financial markets for long-term funding for growth-oriented small businesses and created the Small Business Investment Company Program. SBICs are privately owned and managed investment funds, licensed by the SBA, that use their own capital plus SBA guaranteed funds to make investments in small businesses. The SBIC program helps fill the gap in the capital markets for businesses that have outgrown the SBA's flagship 7A loan guarantee program, but remain too small or high risk for the private equity industry. The key to the program's success is leveraging federal funds to expand the amount of private capital invested in promising small firms. SBA provides funding to qualified SBICs with expertise in certain sectors of the economy. SBICs then use their own funds and leverage from SBA to invest in these small businesses. Their actions have facilitated over 3 million jobs total and nearly $6 billion per year of investment in domestic small employers. To date, small business investment companies have assisted thousands of high-growth businesses, providing over $100 billion in capital. In this Congress, the House passed 2 pieces of legislation from this committee that expand the SBIC program. The Small Business Investment Opportunity Act of 2017 increases the cap for the SBIC that manages just one company from $150 million to $175 million. And the Investing in Main Street Act of 2017 increases the percentage of capital and surplus banks and federal and savings associations can invest in an SBIC. Both measures seek to increase the flow of much-needed capital to small businesses. Despite these efforts, more work needs to be done, in particular to diversify the program. Greater access for women and minority-owned funds would in turn increase the dollars flowing to women and minority-owned small businesses. Similarly, additional efforts to invest in rural small businesses could spur economic growth in these areas. During today's hearing, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on how we facilitate investment in our nation's entrepreneurs and small businesses, and I thank them in advance for their testimony. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. I'd like to explain the timing. You may all be aware of how the lights work, but if not, I'd like to take a second to explain that. You'll have 5 minutes to deliver your testimony. The light will start out as green. When you have 1 minute remaining, the light will turn yellow. Finally, at the end of 5 minutes, it will turn red, and I ask that you try to adhere to that time limit. Also, if committee members have an opening statement prepared, I ask that they be submitted for the record. And I'd like to introduce our distinguished panelists today. Our first witness is Brett Palmer. Mr. Palmer is the president of the Small Business Investor Alliance, also known as SBIA, an association that has a focus on the SBIC programs. We need a few more acronyms here, don't we? With over 9 years at SBIA, Mr. Palmer is well-versed in the intricacies of the program. His previous experience includes time on Capitol Hill and at the U.S. Department of Commerce. I appreciate you being here with us today. Our next witness is Tease, is that correct? Colin? Colin. Mr. Colin is a partner at Avon Private Equity in my home district of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Go Hawks. Mr. Colin has spent approximately 15 years at Avon, which focuses on late-stage and expansion-stage financing. Prior to Avon, Mr. Colin spent time working for the Boston Consulting Group in Chicago and on the startup management team at Orbitz. He has also practiced corporate law at Kirkland & Ellis in Chicago. Thank you for joining us today. It's always great to hear the perspective of a fellow Iowan. Our next witness is Michael Painter. Mr. Painter is co-founder and the managing partner at Plexus Capital in Raleigh, North Carolina, where they focus on middle market business. Prior to co-founding Plexus Capital, he worked for RBC Bank and investment firms in both New York and North Carolina. It's a pleasure to have you with us today, Mr. Painter. And I yield now to Ranking Member Snyder to introduce the remaining witness.
Thank you. It's my honor to introduce Mr. Mark Walsh, the Managing Director of Ruxton Ventures here in Washington. Washington-based private equity firm invests in technology, media, and education companies. Prior to this position, Mr. Walsh served as SBA Associate Administrator for the Office of Investment and Innovation. In this role, he oversaw all SBIC, SBIR, Accelerator Incubator, and other growth activities at SBA, and was appointed to key committees at the Securities and Exchange Commission and Department of the Treasury. Before his government service, he had a 30-year career in technology, media, venture capital, and angel investing. Mr. Walsh is a graduate of Union College and received his MBA from Harvard. Welcome, Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Appreciate all of our witnesses being here today. Mr. Palmer, you are recognized for 5 minutes. You may begin. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Brett Palmer. I am president of the Small Business and Investor Alliance. I'd like to thank the chairman, Ranking Member Snyder, and Congressman Lawson for being here today, and the rest of the members of the subcommittee and the staff. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to share what we know about the SBIC program and small business investing and to answer your questions about it. The SBIA is the trade association of small business investors that includes the SBIC industry. The goal of the SBIA is to promote a healthy ecosystem for small business investing, one that benefits both small businesses and their investors, and thereby promoting economic growth and job creation. Small business investment companies have been around since 1958, and what was true in the 1950s will always be true. Small businesses need external patient capital to grow and thrive, and it is really hard to access that type of capital. Debenture and non-levered SBICs have increased the amount of small business investment capital, with almost $6 billion invested in fiscal year 2016, the last year for which we have full data. All SBIC investments must be used for domestic small businesses, with at least 25% going to even smaller enterprises. And SBICs invest across a broad range of industries and across a broad range of geographies. And actually, I think Congressman Lawson's district runs the northern part of Florida, and Mr. Kern here actually, I think, is looking at an investment that would connect those that corridor from Tallahassee to Jacksonville. I'll let you talk about that. It is common to see investments in manufacturing and low and moderate income areas via SBICs. And this industry and geographic spread is important because SBICs are often the first institutional capital into small businesses, which benefit from their capital, but also from their professional help in scaling up their business, professionalizing themselves, and building out boards. The program is having the best and lowest loss rate in its 59-year history, which is important because taxpayer protection is the highest priority for the SBIC industry. There is currently unprecedented private sector interest in getting capital into small businesses via SBIC funds, and the private sector is the leading critical component to making the program work effectively. It is a market-driven program. A recent Library of Congress study found that SBIC-backed businesses created 3 million new jobs over the course of their study and 6.5 million jobs. And that's a period that included the Great Recession and the tech bubble bursting. The study was performed with researchers from Duke's and Pepperdine's Business School. And they found that the debenture-backed SBICs created, on average, about 125 new jobs, and non-levered, more equity-oriented SBIC investors created over 530 new jobs per small business receiving investment, which is pretty big numbers. Those are not uniform across every small business, but the average. Between these two types of investments, about over 7% of net new jobs in the United States came from SBIC-backed businesses. That's an extraordinary number for a little-known program. But that's what the program is supposed to do. These quiet successes were achieved while the debenture program was one of the only major SBA programs that was able to maintain its zero subsidy rate, which matters. Again, this covers the period of the Great Recession and the tech bubble bursting for the debenture program. And with the help of Congress and the SBA, there's been significant operational reforms made over the past 8 years or so, and they've been producing the positive results that you've sought. With this program, it has a great track record. There are always areas for improvement that can be made both by the private sector on our side as well as from the government, because there are many more communities that would benefit from having access to this type of capital. And private capital is, with private capital investment at record highs, we'd like to see that spread across more of the country, to more communities, to more businesses, across more sectors, because there's been good stuff that's occurred, but more certainly can and should be done. And with that, I'd like to take a moment to thank the committee for passing those two bills that were mentioned before. They are simple, common-sense bills that will help access and get more capital out there to these worthy small businesses. And with that, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Your last name pronounced Kolner? Kern. Kern. Yeah, maybe.
Sorry. Kern.
Kern.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Just how it's spelled.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good, Brad. Mr. Kern.
Yes.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Blum, Member Snyder, Ranking Member Snyder, and Member Lawson for the opportunity to testify here today and for holding this hearing. Access to capital is a tremendously important issue for small businesses across the country, and the SBIC program effectively helps to resolve that issue. I'm eager to provide you with my perspective as an SBIC fund manager and also a past member of the SBIA board. My name is Kern, and I'm a partner of Avon Private Equity firm based in the heart of the Midwest. Our central office is in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. We have, at the time, 2 regional offices in Madison, Wisconsin, and in Kansas City, and cover our Midwest footprint through those. I joined Avon in 2002, so I've been there for 15 years now, and it was a return to my home city of Cedar Rapids. At Avon, we stay true to our roots by focusing on helping small, regionally based businesses grow. We specialize in late stage and expansion stage financings, and we partner with strong management teams that seek long-term business growth. Our focus is on smaller investment opportunities, and they're concentrated mostly in the upper Midwest, states such as Iowa and surrounding states, although we do invest nationally, and as Brett mentioned, we have one company now that is we invested in about a year ago that is based in Jacksonville and recently acquired another company to help it expand into Tallahassee. So we are covering the northern Florida market with that. It's a company that does precast concrete for road expansions and culverts and wastewater management mainly. We have extensive private equity experience. There are 7 members of our investment team. We've made investments in over 300 companies throughout our careers. Through our firm's history, just in Iowa, we've helped deploy $34 million in capital that helped create or sustain over 6,000 jobs. Those numbers may not mean a lot in a place like Manhattan, but they do for Iowa. These investments produce great growth for small businesses, as well as returns for our investment partners, which includes repayment in full to SBA and the American taxpayer. I've got some more detail in my written testimony, but I will outline a little bit about the SBIC program. It has a rigorous licensing process for prospective funds, which ensures taxpayer protection and safeguards the program's reputation. One requirement for licensing is that management teams have extensive prior investment experience and good investment track records. We meet that demand. Our firm's experience dates back to the start of the SBIC program in 1959, and we have basically over 40 years of continuous SBIC management experience in our firm. Repeat licensing like this is a good thing, as it demonstrates to prospective small business partners our previous fund successes, our commitment to serving this undercapitalized market, and demonstrates to the taxpayer that we are good stewards of tax dollars. We have a history of on-time payments to SBA and overall compliance with clean examinations without findings. We strongly support the SBIC program because it provides the opportunities to supplement our capital with up to 2 times more capital to deploy to small businesses to support their growth. Given the increasing concentration of capital among large funds and institutions, it's difficult to find capital with a dedicated strategy of investing in small businesses and in small funds. And it is questionable whether many of the small funds like Avon could even continue to fund small businesses if it were not for the SBIC program. We are often the first providers of institutional capital into small businesses. We help professionalize the small businesses and make sure they have fundamentally solid operations and partner with strong management teams to do so. Give a little bit of a history or a little bit of some stories about some of our investments. We've made over 26 investments in Iowa. Our most recent was just completed last month in Happy Joe's Pizza and Ice Cream. I don't know if sure you're familiar with that, Mr. Blum. It's a family-run pizza parlor chain that was founded in 1972, has 54 locations across Iowa and other Midwestern states. We've already hired additional people to help it on a growth strategy and are right now looking at additional locations to grow out the operations. So he is still involved in it. Yes, so he is part of the management team now. Well, Joe is retired. His son Larry is still involved. So that's just an example of our investing in Iowa. And without the SBIC program, we would not have had our successful history of deploying growth capital to American small business. The SBIC program has effectively helped us leverage our private capital that we were able to raise and invest in small businesses. Thank you for holding this hearing. and I encourage the committee and this Congress to continue to fully support the program so it may expand, support more domestic small businesses, and create even more American jobs. I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Kern. Let the record reflect that Happy Joe's Pizza has some pretty darn good taco pizza. Love it. Mr. Painter, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Blum, Ranking Member Snyder, and Mr. Lawson for having us here today. So I've been involved in the SBIC program for over 20 years. My partners and I used to work at a small regional bank in North Carolina called Centura Bank, and we had a fund that served to provide the growth capital that went beyond what the traditional bank could provide. And in 2004, we went out on our own and formed our first independent SBIC, and we've now invested in over 87. We've invested in 87 companies, and that employ collectively thousands of people. So we've made a big impact, and we're one example of many SBIC managers across the country who are making similar impacts. My message today is really about three things. One, this is the most impactful and best example of a public-private partnership that I know of. Second, it is a program that supports a perpetually underserved area of the market. And third, it is impacting real lives. It's easy to talk about our program and our business in numbers and returns. It is ultimately about real people, real companies, real communities, and impacting lives and families. As far as a program, public-private partnership that makes sense, I think the key here that I know you all understand, but I hope more people on the committee and in Congress understand, is that all of the dollars that we raise from the private markets are at risk first ahead of any federal guarantees. That's a critical part of the program and why it has been so successful. So in our case, we have 56 banks, 130 individuals, 18 family offices, and 9 institutions that have invested $475 million with us. That all is there protecting federal guarantees, so our dollars would be lost first before the federal guarantees would be hit. So that is a big differentiator in the public-private partnership world. I also think you have a staff that has been there for a long time that is driven by the purpose of the program. They're motivated by the purpose and the impact of the program, which is measurable and meaningful. And we've got 50 years plus of success in this program. So I don't know of any other public-private partnership that has had that level of success. We also support a perpetually underserved area of the market. There are over 100,000 small businesses in the United States that have 10 to 100 million in sales. Roughly half of those are owned by somebody over the age of 40. So you have this big portion of the market, roughly $2 trillion of value, that has to transition to the next generation of owner-operators. The public markets have ready access, public companies have ready access to the public markets to affect those transition each and every day. The private markets don't have that luxury, particularly at the small end of the market. I've been in this market for 20 plus years. It is perpetually underserved. You have fund managers that come into our market, they have success, and they go up market because it's easier to do 10 deals and grow by doing 10 bigger deals than it is to do 10 deals than 20 deals. It takes a lot of fixed costs. We look at 100 opportunities to invest in one. So to really provide capital to small businesses, you have to be committed to building a real business and putting infrastructure in place, and that's not possible without the SBA program. And back to the real driver of this, we do impact real lives, and I think telling stories about those lives is a good way to visualize it for me. We've got a company, Design Shop, in Orlando, Florida. This is Doug and Sherry Hughes, husband and wife, started this company in 2000, and they serve the trade show market. So they help companies prepare the materials they need for trade shows, and they now employ 50 people. So husband and wife, 2000, start a business that now employs 50 people and their families, impacting their families, not just those 50 people, and their communities. Another example is Hughesby in Charlotte. started by Scott Huseby. He's a third-generation court reporter. Comes from a long line of court reporters, saw a need to professionalize this industry. He now employs 50 people at Huseby, and more importantly, he engages with over 1,800 court reporters across the country to provide a steadier flow of business to people all over the country. So I look forward to taking questions about the program. I care a lot about the program and about the purpose. It is an impactful program, and I think the more stories that get out there about the people behind it, the more support there'll be for it. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Mr. Painter. Now recognize Mr. Walsh, former venture capitalist, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you for pronouncing my name correctly. It's often tough. Good morning. My name is Mark Walsh, and from late 2015 until January 19th of this year, I ran the Office of Investment and Innovation, OII, or as we called it, OI, at the SBA here in Washington, D.C. My area oversaw, as was said, all SBIC, SBIR, and incubator accelerator programs. It was my first job in government. Before that, for 35 years or more, I had a career in technology, the internet, and media, with senior or C-suite positions at a wide variety of companies, including America Online, GE, HBO, VerticalNet, and more. For the last 17 years, I've been an active angel investor and venture investor for a wide variety of startups and have served on the board of directors for many of those companies and other high-growth venture-backed entities. I've also served as chairman of the Bipartisan Policy Center here in Washington, D.C., the best think tank in town, in my personal opinion. The SBIC program is one of the most innovative, financially successful, and well-structured government programs in existence, period, close quote. But I left the program almost 10 months ago, and some recollections and remembrances are dimmed by time. Also, my opinions are my own and are not meant to reflect anyone else's or any other agenda. As was said, the SBIC program takes low-interest debt and provides it to professionally managed domestic venture capital and private equity funds. These funds need an SBIC license to get the investment. The license application and approval process is super rigorous and helps avoid mismanaged or ill-targeted funds from receiving taxpayer dollars. Further, a licensee reports all significant investment activities to the OII on a regular quarterly basis, and their annual on-site inspections by OII-trained teammates. In short, OII is as vigilant an investor as any in the private market, if not more so. However, as we all know, investment entails risk, so OII also has a trained team of workout experts who help funds that ran awry of financial health, and in some cases assumed ownership and control of failed funds and disposed of the assets at admirable salvage valuations. But make no mistake, the amount of unrecoverable investment was minuscule and was the envy of the private sector. The SBIC program is a fabulous example of a public-private partnership, as was mentioned by my colleagues. My colleagues in the organization and teammates were as motivated, talented, and professional as any I have worked with in my private sector career. Some of them are here today, and I enjoyed my all-too-short stint immensely. But I was asked here to address some ways to improve the SBIC program. Nothing is perfect, and there are a few areas I'd like to address if I were still in charge. Number one, outreach. We made extraordinary progress during my time in discovering new funds and new types of funds, and in meeting and engaging more diverse fund managers, gender, demographic, geographic, and market-focused diversity, more than prior efforts. This happened because my teammates and I made it a priority, and I would encourage the committee to make sure the program pursues that with vigor. Second, promote and award certain types of funds. Impact funds, which are aimed at social, environmental, educational, or institutional improvement, as opposed to pure profit, are important. The program should be more able to encourage impact funds with lower interest rates, more attractive payback options, or even faster application processing. And speaking of that, number three, streamlining the license process. I'm sure you guys would agree with that. The amount of paperwork expected of a license applicant and license holder is heavy. OII and the program should continue their efforts to use available technologies to streamline these processes. Fourth, equity ownership. OII should have the ability to receive a small amount of equity in the companies its capital invests in. SBICs have held debt stakes in many iconic companies. For instance, an SBIC in 1977 held over 4% ownership in a small technology company called Apple. Imagine if we'd had that 4% ownership stake today. OII should continue efforts to create ownership upside for American taxpayers through this program with equity ownership. Fifth, more private sector partnerships. During my stint, teammates and I created a wonderful board diversity initiative called Onboard, the open network for board diversity, with a partner, LinkedIn, the professional social network. There are many innovative private sector companies who would be partners in new opportunities that OII should be freer to pursue. And lastly, networking opportunities between funds and companies. OII is a natural clearinghouse for a wide variety of data it collects about its funds and the companies that it invests in, as you heard from my colleagues to my left. It should have, in my opinion, more open access to the data for industry observers, companies, funds, and analysts. To conclude, there are improvements and opportunities that I could detail beyond that, but these are some that I saw had great potential when I was at the agency. And lastly, let me also mention the SBIA, or Small Business Investor Alliance. They're the industry association focused on the SBIC marketplace, and as you heard Brett Palmer, their CEO, testify a moment ago. Their staff, management, members, and board were very helpful to me as I learned the program, and they were great partners for our initiatives. I can't thank them enough for their productive role in the ongoing success of the SBIC program. Thank you for inviting me today, and now I and my colleagues are ready to help with any questions and comments you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Due to the ranking member Snyder's tight time schedule, I'll reserve my time till the end, and I'll now recognize Mr. Snyder for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you. And again, I want to thank all of the witnesses for being here and sharing your experience and your perspectives on a program that clearly is making a difference in communities across the country, in particular in the heartland, and we need to continue to do that. I just want to take the opportunity to touch on one issue. I think one of the value addeds of the SBIC program is the leverage it provides, the ability to work with public-private partnership. But I know from experience, I know from your submitted testimony that there are many other added value aspects to this. For example, the involvement of the SBIC lenders with the portfolio companies. I'd like to open it up and have you touch on some of those additional benefits that are provided to your portfolio companies.
Well, let me start. It is important because this isn't just money. You're getting actual expertise, and I hear it all the time from our members. We actually have recently partnered with Ohio State, their business school. There was something called the National Center for the Middle Market that GE Capital funded to train their portfolio companies. Well, GE Capital got broken up and went 6 ways to Sunday around the world. Got complicated, but they still had this training platform there. We have now partnered with Ohio State, and actually today it's one of these training sessions is going on where portfolio companies of SBICs are able to attend, and it is a platform for training them how to scale up their business, how to attract talent, how to retain talent, how to really grow their business and scale up in a professional, organized way. And that's something that we're doing in a really concise, organized, dedicated feature just for SBIC-backed businesses, and that's going well. That's as one example of one of the things that we're doing.
I think that's a really important example. The small businesses we invest in, it's not, they don't need to invent new strategy. I mean, they know how to run their business. They know how to manufacture their product or deliver their service. What they haven't done before is scaled that business. So they need tools to learn how to do that. It's basic stuff, the basic blocking and tackling. We actually have 4 of our operating company professionals at the Ohio State event this week, and we have 2 of our internal people there so that we can help learn ourselves better how to train our other companies. And that's one thing we're focused on is we have right now 1 full-time operating partner, so somebody who has run a small business that is now working with 4 of our companies to help them with their growth and putting in the frameworks that are needed to help grow a business. And we're committed to growing that platform. That's a key point, is that it's not money. It's about the money is important. That's the driver of us coming in. But we also have to provide more value than just dollars to make an impact.
Mr. Kern?
And we are, as a small fund, and even by SBIC standards, a small fund, we are almost always the first institutional capital, the first other than family money that's been in the businesses that we invest in. And sometimes they've never even had a bank loan before. So it really is the first kind of outside capital, outside advisors, outside board members that they take on in these businesses, and it's a big step toward professionalizing them. And one of the key things we do is help them add the management talent and complete the management team that's there to help run and grow the business.
Great. Mr. Walsh, and as you go, as you've given your answer, also touch on how to try to expand the outreach to more minorities and women-owned businesses.
Fair enough. If I just might say, if you read the press, it seems like all this money is going to like hip companies in Silicon Valley and for the next for the next Snapchat or whatever. But in fact, the gentleman to my left and the men and women who work with them are in the front line of entrepreneurship. These are first-time investors in the lunch bucket companies that make this nation great. These are companies that aren't that sexy in many cases, but they are the people and the places that employ people sustainably. So that's my answer to the first part. To the second part of your question. It really ended up being just going out there and shaking the tin cup. I mean, my colleagues and I, during my stint, literally went to every conference, every gathering, ads in newsletters, met folks like the men to my left and other men and women, and just tried to reach out to gender and racially diverse fund management, and more importantly, tried to exhort and encourage those funds to find companies that were owned and operated by diverse management teams. And a final point, this onboard initiative I mentioned was a way to get diverse directors into those private companies. Because a lot of times these companies had a board of directors that all had the last name because they're a family-owned company. So when they were trying to expand the expertise of their board of directors, we would tell them to search our area on LinkedIn for the resumes of domain expertise people with diverse backgrounds and gender diverse and racially diverse elements to bring those people on the boards of directors.
Yep. I think that's important. Oftentimes these companies have their board meetings when they shave, and so it's important to expand that.
Actually, one thing I'd like to add to that, Mr. Snyder, if it's all right, is we have tried very hard to do that, and there's more to be done. Over the course of 9 years, our chair of the board, 4 of our 9 chairs of the board are women. In the private equity industry, that's unheard of. That's not 50%, but it's progress. There's more to be done. And Mark, who did a fantastic job when he was running the program, did push that, and the more can be done. I think one of the barriers, too, as far as the fund manager side, is new funds coming in. It's a risk to go through this regulatory process that really is the size of a telephone book with hundreds of thousands of dollars of expense. You want to make sure you can get through it. And so, it's reputational risk, it's personal financial risk. Having some clarity as far as what that is and getting that streamlined would really benefit getting a broader range of gender, race, and geography from where we don't have it now.
Great. Thank you. And my time is long expired, but thank you for your answers. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Walsh, I did the mental math. I think 4% of Apple today would be about $40 billion that we would have.
I think a tad less, but it's a heck of a lot of money, Mr. Chairman.
I'll take a tad of $40 billion. Mr. Palmer, I think you mentioned in your testimony that we're experiencing our best loss rates ever. Mm-hmm. What are those loss rates? I was on a $1 billion bank board for 15 years. And I was the director of the chairman of the directors credit committee. So if our loan loss ratio ever got really low, sometimes we would ask, are we taking enough risk or taking enough chances in loaning money?
That's actually.
Could you address both?
That's an excellent question. The losses are the lowest. I mean, the program has run at zero subsidy for a long time. And that's good. So ever since Congress reformed that back in the 90s, and we really, it's something that's a mark of industry pride that it's been able to maintain that zero subsidy. We want to take that case. The measure that shows up as far as the losses is something called the annual charge. The SBA charges a fee on the leverage as a calculation to offset what they think the loss history has been. It's now down to 22 basis points on top of the leverage. Frankly, there's a little bit of industry concern that maybe is too low. One, from a loss side, but two, also making sure, look, everyone likes low fees, but we want to make sure we're maintaining that zero subsidy rate. And so that 22 basis points, which is calculated, is low, and that's fine, but that's assuming that things are going to keep going the way they are now, which is great guns. So maybe we might take a look at, relooking at that fee and maybe setting a floor on that fee so that there's always enough of a cushion in the future to maintain that zero subsidy rate. But the investments themselves, because of the private capital being first loss position, you have to lose all your own money first before the taxpayer money is exposed, which is different from 7A and 504. It really does align things in a good way as far as making good decisions. And makes it hard to lose money. It's not that it's not possible. You can do it. People have risen to that challenge. But it's
in the federal government.
Including the federal government. But frankly, this is a case study in the federal government working. And that doesn't get much attention too often. But this really is. And so The loss rates are very low. They could do more risk. Frankly, one of the things that they did was cleaning up the licensing program to minimize risk in 2008, 2009, 2010 really, which was really helpful in filling this massive capital void that existed back then. But at the same time, we ought to be taking a look at smaller funds. It's harder to get a big fund in a smaller state, Rocky Mountain West and others, and smaller funds are riskier. So maybe the program does need to look at allowing some smaller funds to more rural areas, smaller cities, to facilitate their market where a $200 million fund might be too big. But but having funds in Boise or in Portland or in Colorado, there are no SBIC funds in Colorado. I mean, that's a pretty big state. There are investments there, but we need to get more smaller funds out to some of these smaller cities and smaller towns across the country.
Thank you, Mr. Kern. 2 out of 3 times, not bad. My percentage is going up. A lot of members on this committee represent rural areas. I'm one of them. You're from my district. Can you talk to me a little bit about the challenges, if there are unique challenges, I assume so, in rural district, rural lending, rural startups versus urban areas?
The biggest challenges in rural areas are just that you don't have the concentration of companies. You don't have you don't have as many companies. You don't have as many managers to hire to start companies and to help grow companies. Attracting. So it's really the challenges are finding businesses, finding enough businesses to make a fund work, and that's why, as Mr. Palmer mentioned, we run a smaller fund, and I think you have to be willing to run smaller funds, and the SBIC program is a great way to do that, to be able to invest in these smaller areas. But the challenges are finding the businesses and finding talent, and to help the companies grow.
Thank you. My time's about expired. I have more questions, so I'll do it in a second round of questioning. I'd now like to recognize the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Health and Technology, my colleague from Florida, Mr. Lawson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. And I'm real happy to see the collaboration between Tallahassee and Jacksonville. It's quite interesting. This is checked about 200 miles. But recently, in the last couple of months, we've had women-owned businesses before the committee, and minorities, women for the committee, and the staff has told us that women-owned business are the fastest-growing businesses in America. But each one of those groups came in and they complained about access to capital. And I was wondering, just listen to the testimony this morning, it would appear that there must be some other factors involved other than the business people coming in saying they need access to capital, how they had to go to uncles, aunt, grandparents, and so forth. And maybe I thought maybe you could share some light on why this exists. And I'll tell you the reason why. In 1978, when I left coaching at Florida State, I went into and I spent some time in Iowa, University of Iowa, needing just $10,000 and going from place to place trying to get those $10,000 to go into business. That was 39 years ago. Today, I don't think that should be an issue for most people, even though I was able to eventually get it. And so what is going on? I don't want to talk too much because I got some other questions on that. What is going on about access to capital for women and minorities today? Ms. Palmer.
There are challenges for all small businesses. They're particularly acute for women and minorities, no question about it. And if you look at the numbers, that bears it out. It varies on a number of ways. The SBA, I'm not expert in all of SBA's programs, but you're talking about $10,000 type sizes. They have a microloan program that serves that. That's sort of the below the scale of where the SBICs are. Most of the SBICs are generally investing in businesses with $1 million or more. So, I mean, every small business would love $1 million or more, but some of them can't absorb it yet. I think some of it is not knowing who to reach out to, sort of the human circles associated with this, and this goes to Mark's comment about reaching out. reaching out to a broader array of small businesses and communities. The SBA needs to get out there. The fund managers need to get out there. And do more. There's some instances, there was actually a hearing in the Senate side on this issue a couple weeks ago, and one of the things they mentioned, which is a true problem, which is if a small business is women-owned or minority-owned, in many cases they can lose that classification if they get institutional investment into them, which doesn't help them. You know, many of them are accessing government contracts and things, and most of the investments aren't in government contract-related businesses, but that's an unintended consequence for accepting outside capital that is designed to help them to fulfill a capital access gap, and now they're being sort of hurt by it. So there's some tweaks that could be made to address some issues like that. Does that change the underlying issue? No. I think the biggest thing is just getting out there and beating the bushes more, to Mark's statement, and Mark has really been committed to this, to do more of it. But I have the chair of our board, her fund, by design, invests more than half of her fund, it's called Ironwood Capital in Connecticut, in women and minority and low-income areas. So it can be done and is done, but it isn't done universally.
Okay, and Mr. Walsh, you stated that in Washington, D.C., that you would say that this is one of the best advocates for businesses and stuff that, you know, they didn't place sales. How did this compare with, and I don't have much time, with minority and women-owned business access to capital that you observe in all the research that you all have been involved in?
Well, it's one of these questions that is always worth pursuing as vigorously as possible, because not only a question, it's a mandate. It is a proven fact that corporations that have diverse boards of directors, gender and racial diversity, perform better, their stock price performs better than companies that don't. So to not have a diverse board of directors and a diverse outlook is actually hurting your shareholders. But to get to access to capital, investors look at risk. They look at the risk of where they're going to put their dollars and what the outcome will be. And the challenge that we saw in SBIC to some extent, but also the SBA, for these women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses, is that they needed to be better, bluntly, at describing their risk and their ability to scale up. Because an investor wants to see a company that will scale up and increase in size, have more employees, grow revenue. So the SBA has done a good job, but I think we can never rest on any laurels in helping those companies build their business plan, describe what they do, and help make the case to investors that they can grow and scale. Because otherwise, why would they take investment, and why would an investor write a check? So there are some women-owned venture capital firms. There are some minority-aimed venture capital firms that chase deals that are companies that are run by minorities or women management teams. I think we can never have enough of those, and I think the SBIC program actually encourages more of those than currently exist, and that's why the public-private partnership element is so key.
Okay. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. What kind of a year is Florida State basketball going to have this year?
They should be great. We didn't do well right now in football, but I'm looking forward to them doing better this year.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to recognize my colleague from Kentucky, Mr. Comer, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question is for Mr. Painter. Are the regulations that SBA has in place to oversee the SBIC program working, and are they sufficient for the size of the program?
So I think if you go back to 2009, there were roughly 315 SBICs. Today, there are roughly 315 SBICs. So there's been a shift in terms of the number of debenture SBICs. So I do think there are there's adequate oversight. I think there are some fixes that can be made with us working with SBA on some just practical changes in the licensing process and oversight process, where you have some well-intentioned standard operating procedures that have unintended impacts. As an example, we close roughly one new investment per month, and just because of the way licensing is set up, we would have been in perpetual standstill and not able to get licensed if we didn't get a special waiver in the licensing process, because when you make a new investment, you have to refile your application. So by definition, we would have just been perpetually refiling every month. So I think there are some common sense changes that can be made within the standard operating procedures that can really help improve the efficiency and oversight.
Okay. Mr. Walsh, you described the licensing process and the amount of paperwork as being heavy. Are there improvements that can be made in the program to address the concern and the bureaucracy?
So as I mentioned in my testimony, it was my first job in government, and I was shocked, I tell you, to find that there's a lot of paperwork in government. So,
right. Me too.
so it is said. I think the organization has made progress in allowing these documents to be digital, so that the access is able to be granted to specific sets of the applicant and other parts of the SBIC team. So digitizing all the documents actually is step A. Step B is making those documents standardized across various elements. I mean, you just heard an example where a fund is asked to start the cycle over every single time. So I know this sounds maybe too simplistic, but having what they call data rooms, where digital access to the types of data, and having the actual forms that you fill out be digitized so you can fill them out online, track them online, you the applicant, and the folks at the SBIC program, that I think would go a long, long way to shrinking the amount of time and effort and paperwork to getting approved.
So how does the SBA interact with the SBICs, like with respect to the licensing process, beyond licensing? How do they work together?
Well, the licensing process can take anywhere from 3 to more than 3 months. It's typically around 8 or 9 months, I think, was the average when I was there, to get approved. Then the fund has access to our capital. Every month, or as was mentioned, every quarter they put a full report out of what they've done. And then at least once every 2 years, typically every year, we have an on-site visit by one of our analysts to physically visit the offices and make sure they're for real. I think our oversight is about as good as anybody in the private sector. You heard earlier, I'm not sure if you were in the room, about the loss ratio being so low. Mm-hmm. I think that the teammates that I had when I was there were about as careful as I've ever seen, and I've spent a lot of time in the private sector. So I'm not sure it needs a lot of tweaking. In fact, I think we might even see gearing back a little bit because the loss ratio is so low.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Comer. I'd now like to recognize the Vice Chairman of the full committee, my colleague from Missouri, Mr. Luke DeMeyer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great to be with you. Just kind of curious. I know that I'm kind of familiar with SBICs, but I was reading here in some of the information about it that SBIC invests in established businesses using a debenture SBIC to fund expansion. Can you explain that? How that works?
Sure. The
debenture is not a loan; it's more like a security.
Yeah. Well, the way the program works is it leverages at the fund level. So the SBIC raises, say, just make the numbers easy, $50 million. It goes through a licensing process. It then can access this credit facility through the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago on a temporary basis, and then every 6 months, they take all of this credit facilities, all the money, all the obligations that are made through the credit facility, they get pooled together, securitized, and sold into a trust, and the government guarantees that, and that's where those debentures are. The form the capital goes to the actual small business can come in several different varieties. It can be straight equity, it can be debt, it can be convertible debt, it can be all sorts of different structures in there. Some of which are recourse, some which are not. But that's the basic gist of the debenture.
Because you're taking a first dollar in a lot of risky investments here. What kind of loss ratio do you experience with SBICs?
The way it's structured, unlike the 7A and 504 program, where there's a loss sharing on the first dollar loss, all the private capital is lost before the taxpayer money is exposed, and there's ongoing review of the portfolio both on a quarterly basis as well as on every investment basis as well as on an annual basis, to make sure that if the fund is going sideways, the SBA does have the capacity to cut off further access to leverage, or if there's regulatory noncompliance. So the losses are very, very minimal, and actually the program has actually run to zero subsidy because of the fees associated with the program since the late 90s when Congress reformed all the SBA programs. It's actually the lowest loss ratio they've had in the 59-year history of the program. And there's an annual charge that they add to the SBA charges to the on the leverage that is now only down to 22 basis points. The historical low on that was 28 basis points, and the historical norm is closer to 70 basis points. So it's really, really low, maybe even too low of a loss rate.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Is I see here with Mr. Kern, he says something about is it Avon? Avon. Pardon me. Avon receives between 500 and 1,000 inquiries a year, yet only finances roughly 4 to 6 small businesses a year. So if we don't experience any losses, are we really taking any chances? And we only have 4 out of 6 out of 1,000 inquiries that are financed. Can you explain that to me?
Well, I think that's due to two things. One is just we get a lot of inquiries. Not a lot of them are not necessarily ones that match what we are trying to do. So they may.
What are you trying to do?
They may be trying. Well, they may be, or what we can do. They may be looking for a lot more money than we can provide. They may be looking for, or they may be. There are some businesses that if they're looking for not enough, too small of amount of money, it becomes difficult for us to do. Or the company doesn't have the growth prospects that we're looking for. So we can't invest in every business that comes our way. We can only invest in we physically only have so many partners and so much time. And once we get involved in the businesses, we are very involved with the management teams and counseling them and working with them. So we are just limited in the amount of businesses that we can invest in.
And just so I was clear on that, I was talking about the loss to the taxpayer. That doesn't mean that there isn't private sector losses. I mean, there are losses too, where businesses are invested in, and there's private capital that is lost. So yes, that does happen, and it's common. It's not pervasive, obviously, but it certainly does happen.
Right. Well, in the average loss rate at the fund level would be you're going to lose on roughly 5 to 10% of what you invest in. So not lose all of it, but on 5 to 10% of what you invest in, you'll have some amount of loss on that.
And
Okay.
that's consistent with our experience as well.
Mr. Kern, you manage, you're advancing funds here. Are you taking an active management role in these companies, or equity part in these companies? Or are you just like a bank, just loaning money to them and kind of watching them from the sidelines?
It's typically a combination of debt and equity. And we are always involved at kind of an active board level with the companies. So we are not day-to-day operators. We back and partner with management teams, but we are active board members helping them with strategy, financing, treasury functions, and kind of overall.
You're like a venture capitalist where you will have somebody on the board.
Yes.
Okay, very good. I see my time's expiring. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lukemeyer. The chairman of our full committee just arrived. Would the chairman like to question? I can give you a couple minutes if you'd like. Thank you. We'll begin now our second round of questioning, and I'd like to recognize my colleague from Florida,
Okay.
Mr. Lawson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any data in front of me as a former business person, but if I was a guest, I would think that financing rate for minority-owned firms is low because of the application process and the lack of technical assistance that is provided to these firms. Can you all provide your thoughts on the assessment, and if it is a need for technical assistance, not only in the application process, but throughout the entire process of becoming an SBIC?
There are two different issues there. One is getting minority fund managers. And one of the challenges with getting more minority fund managers, and this applies to women too, is to get an SBIC license, you have to have basically been in a private equity fund before. And so you're sort of cycling from the same pool, and to get beyond a more diverse range of fund managers, it's tough with the way that it's set up right now. So technical assistance isn't necessarily going to help that. It'll help a little bit as far as if there's greater surety in getting through the licensing process, but you're still drawing from a fairly small pool as opposed to doing some things to recognize professional experience people have either on the banking side or on the investment banking side to get more fund managers in that are diverse. On the actual businesses accessing the capital, that's a little bit all over the place. Some technical assistance there, getting them steered to the right places, whether it be a conventional conventional bank loan, a micro loan, whether they need equity investment or others, matters. I was, a number of years ago, I was doing one of these sort of Shark Tank type things and helping small businesses, and there was a minority-owned business there that was looking for a couple $1 million. It was a third generation business, and people were saying, oh, I'll take this amount of your business and that sort of thing. And I went to the guy afterward and said, don't give up a dime of your business. You don't need to give up a single drop of equity to get what you need to do. Don't lose control of your business. Here's 5 or 6 people you can talk to that can give you the capital you're needing for looking what you need. That's what that person needed. Frankly, it would have been bad had it been, he would have been taken to the cleaners if he had just gone with people are sort of throwing out. Now, that's not how the actual transactions get done. But yes, there's more education needed and more understanding of how to access the right type of capital at the right type of your business's development. And we try to do more of that, and we probably can do more.
Okay. It's a complex issue that I don't have the answer for, but I know for me personally, I have 3 daughters, and I know my oldest daughter asked me 3 years ago, we were talking about work, and she said, well, would you ever want to come into my industry? And she said, well, I didn't know that was possible, because all she sees are men, and mostly white men, in my industry. So I think for that, what we've struggled at Plexus is when we're doing hiring processes to get diverse pools of candidates that we can interview. And we're now working on education programs with colleges so that people know that it's an opportunity. I think another really important point is there is a treasure trove of data at SBA, and there is a group of really smart people in the education arena that would love to analyze that for public policy purposes. And they can dig into issues like that. It is such a complex issue that without getting the best brains around the world to focus on it, I don't know that we can solve it. So I would really encourage consideration of figuring out a way to unlock that data and allow people from the educational world and policy world to analyze the data so we can solve problems like that. And the data is there. It's just a matter of somehow unlocking it and having access to it.
Okay, and I have less than a minute, but I want to ask you a question because it's a big issue. How does tax reform help small businesses?
Oh, it helps a lot. The more small businesses can understand a tax code, use it efficiently, the more money they can keep to reinvest in their businesses, the better off they are. So the bill was just released last week. Everyone's still going through the details, but the tax system our current tax system is Byzantine and anti-growth, and a reform that gets to a lower tax rate that's simpler and pro-growth would be, I think, universally accepted and supported.
And I think it's important, too, just the certainty around it. Again, taking it to the human level. When we go to board meetings and we're sitting in Orlando, Florida with Design Shop, and you have people there that have real money, real parts of their lives at risk, and they're being asked to make decisions about future spending, it's very difficult to do that with uncertainty about where taxes are headed. And if you give them clarity on, a reduction in taxes, then they become more comfortable spending that money for growth.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
That's a great question. Thank you, Mr. Lawson. And I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Walsh, I'm intrigued by your background. I'm a private sector guy myself, and this is my first gig, if you will, in government. And you're a private sector guy. You served a couple years in government. Why did you serve in government?
I knew my 2 predecessors in this job, knew them well from the private sector. In fact, I hired and worked with my direct predecessor. He told me this is the greatest hidden secret in the federal government. This was effectively the venture capital firm, or sometimes called the vulture capital firm, the venture capital firm of the U.S. government. It was an incredible program. It was exciting to meet the type of people involved, and in fact, at the end, you actually saw real impact in real people's lives with investment that made a difference in companies that matter to our nation. So not to get at the flag and salute it, but I thought if there was ever a place in the federal government where it would map against my background and I could hopefully add some value and I would see the outcomes being so fruitful, this was the place. Final point. I told my lovely spouse that in the job, everything I was hoping to see in government, I saw times 10. and everything I was hoping not to see in government, I saw times 10. So it was very, very eye-opening to see all the great things that were happening, and sometimes, as we've heard some of the testimony today, reflecting some of the grinding wheels of government made it a little tougher than it would have been. But overall, it was aimed. I did it because it mapped against my background. To your point, I saw the outcomes being so positive, and again, I wouldn't trade any minute in that job. I loved every single bit of it.
As a private sector person, what kind of a grade would you give the SBA overall? I know you
the
probably weren't
SBA or the SBIC program?
Well, both.
Okay.
Both.
I give the SBIC program an A-. I think it needs improvement. The SBA program, boy, am I going to regret this, but thank you for putting me on the spot, sir. I think the SBA program is a B-, and I mean no disrespect to my professional colleagues at it. I think the SBA program, the other parts that we talk about, I think they need some improvement and some outcome improvements. I think the SBIC is the shine, and I'm biased. I think the SBIC, SBIR, and accelerator programs are the shining jewel in the SBA family.
Thank you. Do you grade on a curve?
What's the best answer to give you, Mr. Chairman, that I...
Thank you for being frank. Mr. Palmer, I looked in your testimony, the distribution of SBIC financing dollars by industry. Number one was manufacturing. Good to see. Good to see. We can use more of that in this country. I was surprised by healthcare was one of the lower percentages as far as an industry segment that is invested in. Can you talk about that? Why? I mean, healthcare is a very dynamic and growing part of our economy, and I'm just a little surprised.
It is, and I was surprised by that too. The numbers are what the numbers are. We just gave a award for Portfolio Company of the Year to a company in Tennessee. It was a healthcare company that provided urgent care centers throughout Tennessee, and I think in a couple in Kentucky too. You know, this little entity that went from 7 employees to 500 employees providing medical care where there wasn't any before. So we certainly have some and some great ones. But it is relatively low, and I don't fully know why that is. But a lot of it on the manufacturing side is generational transfer, where the founders are retiring and their management team is buying out the owner and reinventing the business. So that's why there's a large number of manufacturing and applying new technologies. But on the healthcare, I think Teese has something to add there, but I don't know.
Mr. Kern, 3 out of 4, I am now.
I think part of it is that looking at the companies and the size of companies that SBICs are investing in, and we're investing in smaller companies. Healthcare is such a large industry that has huge companies in it, and those companies, there aren't as many small businesses necessarily involved in it, and there are a lot of, they're just pure numbers-wise, I think a lot more small manufacturing and service businesses out there, and so the businesses that we as SBICs tend to focus on and invest in skew differently maybe than the economy as a whole.
Right, it's a much more developed industry on the medical side, so it's a much more developed, system for access to capital relative to manufacturing and service.
I've got quite a few questions, so I guess your answers to this one will have to be brief, but I'd like to hear from each one of you. Just give me what you think is the state of small business in America today, or the healthiness of small business in this country today. And we understand, to tag on to Mr. Lawson's great question, we understand that the tax reform is going to help. We understand regulatory relief helps. We understand reducing uncertainty helps. We also understand a robust and growing economy helps. Get that. But what's the state of small business today?
I think there's a lot.
Try to be somewhat
Sure, I'll be
brief.
quick. I think it's summed up in a word. I think there's optimism. I mean, I think there really is a lot of hope that the government is actually working with them, and there's going to be some of the shackles are going to come off on regulatory and tax. So when I'm traveling the country and talking to folks, what I'm hearing is a lot of optimism. There's always a certain level of business uncertainty. Business people can deal with. Political and regulatory uncertainty, they can't. So I think optimism is what I hear the most of.
Mr. Kern?
I would second that too. You stole my word, Brett. I think on the whole there's optimism. It's always tempered with caution, but I think we see businesses more eager to invest and grow now than they have been for a number of years, I think.
Mr. Painter?
There's undoubtedly no better place to own and start and own a small business than the United States of America. It is That's why I love doing what I do. I don't know what the future looks like, but I know that you have resilient people focused on growing small businesses with an employee base that is a meaningful percentage of our economy, and we have plenty of things we can work on and get better with SBA and on our own at individual funds, but it's healthy and it's thriving like it always has and like it always will.
Mr. Walsh?
People are pumped up. It is cheaper to start a business today because of technology and other tactics and tools than ever before. And you can start businesses cheaper in places that normally didn't used to have businesses. So I think we've had sort of from cautious optimism on the other end of the scale. I think people are really, really maximally pumped up. This is the place. It's cheaper to do. And there are tools and tactics and money available to help you grow.
If I can just follow up on that, I find it interesting that uncertainty, I agree, is one of the biggest impediments to expanding a business. If you don't know the rules of the game are going to be tomorrow, how do you prepare for it? Correct. Well, what has changed as far as uncertainty to cause this optimism? What has changed to cause the optimism? I mean, because healthcare, I guess one could say it's probably we're more uncertain than ever on what's going to happen as far as healthcare goes. I'm just curious.
Yeah, if I can toss a thought out, it's in the last couple of decades. Back in the day, if you left a large company which used to have a pension and a very secure environment, you know, the old days of corporate environment, if you left to start a business and it failed, your record, your career was besmirched, right? Today, in fact, failure is not a sign of a negative tint or hue of your career. In fact, failure for many investors is a sign of education. You learn a lot from failing. So I think there's an element of risk that today's workers are able to have a higher appetite for, because it doesn't take as much money to start a business, and you're not kind of ruining your career arc by trying it and having it not work out. So the uncertainty of the capital structure, the uncertainty of your cost structure, the uncertainty of your tax structure, I think those are slowly getting better, but the uncertainty about your career is also something that has kind of, I think, been taken care of and made more positive.
Anyone else on that?
I just think there's always going to be uncertainty. There's always risk in small business. So it's just simplifying the tax code and so that people know the environment they're operating in, and the less complex we can make it so you don't have to hire teams of tax attorneys to help you figure out how you need to operate, the better.
And part of it is just the spirit of small business owners. Small business owners are optimists by nature. You don't start a small business and look to grow a small business if you're not optimistic about yourself and about your company in the future. So it's what's great about our industry and who we get to work with there is a natural optimism there, and I think people in small business tend to try to see the future as bright.
Speaking of not having as much of a fear of failure, I think it's Mr. Painter. In someone's testimony, they mentioned out of 100 companies looked at, one qualifies for financing. Tell me about the other 99. Why, in general, I know each one's unique, but why don't they qualify? What are the problems with the other 99?
Right. So I think the best way to describe it would be is if you think about the very mature market, where public companies have access to all types of capital, you have hundreds of suppliers of capital that all have a different focus. They find their niches and they focus on it and they dominate it. At the small end of the market, there are so many gaps. So when I go in to meet with a company, I don't understand. There's probably 50% of them where we just don't understand enough about what they do to be able to take that risk. So I can't know everything about every industry. So that's one piece. Like, we have to focus in certain areas so that we can ultimately protect taxpayer dollars and also deliver a return to our investors. Then you have companies that don't have the proper accounting files. We have issues that come up all the time around accounting, and we'll think we're looking at numbers of X, and then we find out it's X times 50%. So there's just a lot of things that have to happen to close one transaction.
Anyone else on that?
Yeah, I think of the 100 down to 1, I think the first 80 of the 99 it's just not a fit. Either they're, as as Mr. Painter said, they're either looking for a different type of capital than we're able to provide. They're looking for much more capital, much less capital. They're looking for more risky capital than what we're providing, or they're looking for more like a bank loan type of capital. So it's not a fit. And then the other 20, it's either something peculiar to the company, or just sometimes you just can't come to a deal, and it's just making a deal, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
And just be clear, it's not that that those 99 don't ever get funded. They might get funding from other sources. They just might be barking up the wrong tree, and they need to get to the right tree. So there's some of that, which also matters. But again, the approach, the preparation that people have, and this goes to Congressman Lawson's point earlier of the training. What is it when you're approaching a professional firm for institutional investment? What is it you need to explain? You need to have a board. You need to have your books looked at internally with a real hard look. You know, what is it you really want to do with your business? And that isn't always sort of lined up coming in before they're approached. And so if you don't have your ducks in a row going in, your chances of success coming out are lower.
When I'm asked about, this will be my last question, when I'm asked about the health of small business, I often talk about a three-leg stool, and the legs being one, the economy in general. I always say small businesses don't worry about taxes if they're not making any money. So they need revenues, and they need to make a profit first and foremost. So an expanding, robust economy is so important to small businesses. Second is the regulatory relief, which we're seeing now, because regulations really hit small businesses to a greater extent than large businesses. And thirdly, tax relief if they do make a profit, so they can keep more of their business, capital in their business. Am I forgetting anything there? Is it a 4-leg stool, 5-leg stool? What is also important?
I would add people. I think access to folks where your business is located, that are trained, that are motivated, that you can motivate through your salary or your bonus or your equity structure, and retaining those people. I think something you've seen recently really pop up, certainly in Silicon Valley and some of the other sort of hotter places for startups, is the loyalty. That people are changing jobs rapidly. So discovering, recruiting, training, and keeping people, I think what I would add is or I would suggest is a 4th leg.
Anyone else? That's a good point. Does anyone else on the up here have any other further questions?
Chairman, I just want to say one thing, if I could.
Mr. Lawson, recognized.
In Florida, they require the businesses to pay the intangible tax. But what I noticed, and I brought to the legislature back then, it cost them more for the CPA than what the tax was, you know. And so I filed a bill, and some people didn't quite understand, to up the amount, a limit of the intangible tax, you know, beyond $25,000, because I was doing it myself, and I had to pay the CPA, all this stuff, fill out all these papers, and so forth, and the fee was not as much as it was to pay the CPA, you know. So I can understand exactly what you're saying, Mr. White, but it was incredible what you had to pay the CPA just to do the intangible tax from. Yeah, so that's all I want to say, Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone, especially our panelists, for being here today. I believe it's extremely important to hear from those working on the ground, on the front lines, with these programs that we cared so deeply about. And as we continue to examine many of the SBA's programs, your comments will be most helpful. You play an important role in the ability of small businesses to grow and create jobs, so I appreciate you all taking time out of your schedule to be here with us today. I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. This hearing is now adjourned.